Welcome, colleagues. Welcome to this final IP strategic debate for 2024. My name is Muriel Poisson. I'm working at the IP office in Paris, the UNESCO International Institute for Educational Planning office in Paris, where I'm in charge of the knowledge management and mobilization team. So for our debate today, we have decided to focus on the following topic: connecting data points to improve education delivery. So as we all know, modern education data systems and technologies do offer now unprecedented opportunities for governments to produce, to use, to share the best possible education data with many more people from central level to the local and school level, including citizens and other stakeholders. And as part of this, education management information systems, known as EMIS systems, have now evolved into much more complex interoperable systems, enabling more precise planning and helping us address issues such as equity, inclusions, and sustainability. Nevertheless, despite all those new opportunities, it's not always clear if all the data that are being used, if all the data that are now being made available are actually used, if they are used effectively, how they are being used, and whether or not the collections and use of these data do result in any real changes. So in this context, for today's sessions, we will have a number of critical issues that we would like to address. So let me mention three of those. First, well, what do these new integrated data and data management systems look like in different contexts? And you will see that you will hear from stories and initiatives from different continents. Second, how such complex data systems concretely and effectively are used to orient actions and to get clear examples of how they are getting used into practice. And also more specifically, how such technical advancements are now used to improve service delivery at local level, including by local education administrations and beyond by citizens. So to discuss those very important issues, we will hear about three main initiatives. The first one from Eswatini that is being developed as part of DHIS2. And if you are not familiar with these initiatives, you will hear more about it during this session. We will hear about a second initiative that is currently being developed in Honduras in Central America, consisting in an early warning systems for school dropouts. And you will hear more about these initiatives. And the last experience that we will hear about will be dedicated to the case of Australia and the US, and that will be presented by Stanley, who has a very wide experience in the domain, as he has been at the core of the development of My School in Australia, that I'm sure many of you do know. So without further ado, well, let me present our four speakers for today's session. So our first speaker is Am Gagnon, my colleague at IP. Am leads the data and evidence cluster of the technical cooperation team here at IP Paris. In particular, he coordinates our portfolio on education statistics, microplanning, and geospatial data analysis. And prior to joining IP in 2015, so about 10 years ago now, Am spent 6 years at UNESCO Institute for Statistics, UIS, advising member states of Latin America and the Caribbean. After Am, you will hear about our second speaker, Mrs. Nelly Dwalmini, who is responsible for the EMIS unit at the Ministry of Education and Training in Eswatini. Nelly is a statistician by profession. She currently leads the team responsible for the implementation of DHIS2 for education as one of an important ministry programs. And to help you understand a little bit more about these DHIS2 initiatives, well, a colleague from these initiatives based in the University of Oslo, Dr. Knut Stering, who will share his experience in the domain. Knut has worked in the field of health information systems since the inception of this DHIS2 platform in 2002, both in Oslo and also with the colleagues from WHO in Geneva. Our third speaker will be Alana, who is from Honduras, Latin America, and she will be speaking in Spanish. Su información, Alana es la directora general de Currículo y Evaluación de Honduras. En esta función lidera proyectos estratégicos en el marco de la sexta reforma educativa y el plan de refundación educativa. Su gestión prioriza la actualización curricular, el levantamiento de censos educativos, la implementación de planos de oferta y demanda educativa y también la promoción de estrategias inclusivas y equitativas de comunicación.
Elle est
And our
responsable de
last
politique,
speaker
and
will be
he's
Dr.
and she
Stanley
is instead.
Halilovic, who has a very long career in supporting states to develop valid, equitable, and inclusive assessments and accountability systems. And in particular, Stanley has served as General Manager for Assessments and Reporting at the Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority, which is the ACARA federal agency. So for the organization of this session, so we will give about 5 to 8 minutes for each of our speakers for the presentation, which will be followed by a short roundtable discussion. And then we will have also a Q&A session for the last about 20 minutes of our session. So I very much encourage all of the participants to post your comments and also your specific questions to our speakers as they speak within the chat. Without further ado, I'll now hand it over to my IP colleague, Am. Over to you, Am.
Thank you, Muriel. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you also, Muriel, for reminding everyone how long I've been working at IIEP and UIS. And before UIS, actually, I was working in my own national statistical office. And so preparing for these remarks, I was thinking, that a lot of the discussions that we take, focusing on information systems, on data in education, really focus on the data itself, the architecture. But we rarely, in our day-to-day discussions, remember that data is political. And thinking about the evolution in data of data systems, I thought, well, politics are changing, policies are changing, and so is data. And so thinking about what I wanted to share with you today, I wanted to kind of look at the recent history and seeing how far we've gone in a short amount of time. Looking how, there was a long time ago where we could almost use interchangeably EMIS and school census. Now it's totally impossible. We went from standalone systems to interoperable system from between MOE data, MOF data, the parliament, maybe other entities. And now we have, in many contexts, already very reactive, very agile data systems. We went from systems working on paper, and then we went to Excel spreadsheets, and then we went to web-based collection. And so going from once or twice a year to almost real-time information in many systems. We went to state level, school level, individual level now, and almost in many contexts already at screen level or, chip level or, IP address level. And so this is really changing the way we need to organize and the way that different stakeholders drive the transformation of education information systems. And thinking about this, there's a lot of, structural changes, micro level stakeholders that influence the way that we work with data in education. International organizations, of course, regional bodies, but also, the government themselves, the parliament's influence, how the Ministry of Education works with data. Then the kind of, transformation of the system really went into the hands of the ministries, of the, the local, let's say, primary stakeholders, beneficiaries in a sense. But now what we see is that really we work at core stakeholder level. Really the planners, the different actors of the system, the school leaders really now influence and drive the transformation of our EMISs in countries. And these drivers of change also move from, structural features, historical legacies, the ideologies of education in certain ways, the way we structure education, to institutions that are morphing and really adapting to the local context. And now really the actors at the local level, the communities really get engaged and take the power to transform the local delivery of education. And so what I wanted to share basically is that, in my opinion, at least, these transformation really influence the way that EMIS's data collection tools are now being very reactive. And not only we were seeing, in the past, going from the top to the top level of government requests for local actors to share data and to send data up. As I was saying in a recent event, we're bringing now the gravity back into the data. So the data that goes up nowadays is also coming back, and we really use this information at local level to really take the best decision, of course, but also really to kind of being very proactive in the way we deliver education. And so the way I'm really looking forward to the discussion today is to see how, micro level data, the avalanche of data that we're under is now being structured and organized in a way that can really be used by local actors. And also drawing information from outside the education system also to be very, let's say, connected to the context in which we deliver education. Not only this, like data-wise, but also from a more institutional framework perspective, the norms and standards, the data ethics is also being transformed. And this we need to take into account also when we think about the future of EMISs. And of course, for me, one of my favorite aspects of working with data is how communities drive the need for information and the use of information. And so I think we're very close to a point of let's say, education data history where the schooling or lifelong learning or the education will be at the core of social life, and that school themselves will be a hub for, of course, learning, but also for many other things. And so I'm really looking forward to the presentations today, and also seeing how we will continue in leveraging the power of data and connecting all these data points all together. So looking forward to the discussion, and perhaps you can also let me know in the chat what you think about all this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Am. So in this context of moving from central information systems to much more localized data systems, taking more into account local context and as a way also to mobilize the school community around. So we are going to go to the experience of Eswatini. That goes very much to the micro levels, in fact, not even to the school levels, but to the pupil levels in terms of data information and how this helps inform the whole systems of decisions within the education system. And so Nelly is going to present the PIN-driven data for education systems transformation as it has been taken place in Eswatini. So over to you, Nelly.
Thank you so much, Muriel. Afternoon or good morning, everyone. So I'm Nelson Dlamini, as mentioned. I'll just simply go to the first slide because the time and the stories are too much. So I'll just give a brief background on EMIS. It was a department that was established in 2009, and it was using paper-based data collection tools and capturing on an access system, and then analysis was done on an Excel spreadsheet. Back then, the questionnaires or the data collections were informed by the Education for All Declaration and the MDGs indicator agendas, and also the ministries and national programs that were in place. But coming up to 2020, we realized that the data collection and the reporting time, it was too much. We usually lag behind by a year or so. So in 2020, UNICEF assisted the ministry in shifting from the paper-based into the web-based system, which is DHIS2 for education for us, not only to manage the school's data, but also learners and staff data using the personal identification number. That is the number that you receive from the civil registry, or for us, it's Home Affairs, the Ministry of Home Affairs. But first, when the data collection had to be revised and updated in order to monitor the new global and regional agendas that were in place post 2015. Those are your SDGs and your AU's 2063s, and also the country's development plans and ministry strategic plans. So two things were in place. We updated the data collection tools, and we also updated from paper-based into a web-based system, which meant that their system had to be managed by schools. And then that called for us to then say we have to train schools on the new tool and also train them on the new way of reporting to the ministry. We piloted the system in 100 schools in the country. From there, we had lessons from the pilot before rolling out to the whole country. The first lesson that we got was that we needed to engage everyone. Every stakeholder needed to be on board and be involved from the onset, from the school level, which would be responsible in managing their own data, to the regional level, who inspects and monitors the schools, to line ministries, because right now we're using the PIN, which is issued by Ministry of Home Affairs. We have to validate that if it's correct or not. To health, if we want to link, we have school health on the side to say that we're also monitoring what is happening on the health side in the schools. So we had to link those and update and train everyone and involve everyone from the onset. And the questions from the school that we got from the focal teachers was, why are we collecting this information? That is where we involved the other stakeholders that in the ministry. For example, we had the planning department, which had their own questions on infrastructure, to come to the trainings to say, why do you want information like this? Where are you using the information? And how can the schools themselves use the same information to plan and also to request for support from the ministry if there's a need? We had UNFPA with the EU-funded project on special education needs, and the ministry's policy says that it's an inclusive education. So we needed to explain the term inclusive education. What does that mean? And how do you support a child with special education needs? And then we had the new questions from the IT and also from WASH. So everyone needed to be on board on the training part. And the good part that was there is that the information that we're collecting, it was already with them, because we had distributed the hard copy questionnaire to say, fill in the information on the hard copy, so that when we train you, you come with the hard copies, and then you capture that into the system so that you can see what it's there. What I love about DHIS2 for education is the inbuilt capacity for analytics, and their tailored dashboard. So they are so user-friendly, such that the following day, after teachers had captured their information, they could easily see the trends on the enrollments, on the infrastructure that was there, on what needed to be improved. So that was one of the things that I think kickstarted the importance of data use at school level. Can we go to the next slide? So the next slide shows at the beginning, because we distributed the questionnaires to schools and then they brought them back, and during the trainings we gave them. The first slide is the questionnaires from the schools, and then the second picture, it's the schools now looking at their information on the dashboard to say, can you speak on your information? What do you think? We already had the team that was assisting us, that is HISP Uganda, had already had the 2009 to 2019 information incorporated into the system, so they could easily track the trends that was happening there. And from there on, we could easily say, now we can go to the regional level to say, this is your region, this is how you're faring in terms of enrollments, the dropout, the reputation, in terms of learners who need assistance, who have special education needs, in terms of the infrastructure that are there under your region. And these are the spots where you can assist. On the following slide, what else? The following slide shows the publicity that came about with the implementation of the system. The first picture is a publication that was from the local newspaper, from the Ministry of Finance, where he was tabling the budget for the previous budget year, saying that now that education is implementing the system, which means we'll be able to know the number of learners and also track our learners throughout the education system. And then the other picture is from when we're launching the system last year, and the local newspaper also captured the information that 6,000 learners had dropped out. What happened to them? 60, yeah, what happened to them? And then from there, you could tell that the data that was being produced, even though before we were lagging behind, but it was informing right now on the policies debates, on the actions that needed to be taken by programmers and program implementers. So what stood out for me from the dropped out, that when we're being interviewed on where the learners are, is the fact that we had a question, because it was based on accredited data. We had a question, one reason to say the learners dropped out because they were relocating to other places. Then relocation doesn't necessarily mean that the learner has dropped out. They might be enrolled into another school, but we can't capture that if we don't know exactly who the learner is. So the PIN would assist us to say, this learner has dropped out from your school because they are relocating, but they've been re-enrolled in another school. And this will bring a clear picture of what is happening in the education sector. And then the next slide is speaking on the PIN, on the national identification number that is being used by the country. The PIN is used by everyone, every citizen, and you get it. You get services based on that. If you go to a health clinic, they will need a PIN to give you services, and they will know the track record you have on the on the health clinics. So for us in education, the PIN started being used in 2020 by the Free Primary Education Program, where the capitation grant had to be released not only to schools, because before it was released to schools based on the number, the head teacher will say, I have 300 learners in my school, and then they will release that grant to that school based on the number that was reported. But then in 2022, to curb the misuse of funds and to also call for accountability from schools, the PIN was then used to say, if you have 300 learners in your school, bring the list of your 300 learners so that we can see. And then they will check that list and the PIN with Home Affairs to authenticate the list. That is where a lot of discrepancies and a lot of things needed to be corrected, because that limited over expenditure on government, on ghost learners, if I may say, and also it limited what can I say? It gave accountability to everyone to say the funds that are being used to certain schools are being used for this particular learner. And then we had OVC grants. OVC grants, again, they are in secondary schools, which is orphaned and vulnerable children. It's used in secondary schools to say, if you're in OVC and you're getting the grant, you have to have the personal identification number. The disbursement is done by the Deputy Prime Minister's office, which is responsible for the social security of every child in the country. So that information also interlinked with education to say that if we are dispersing for this much, is that learner really in school, or you are dispersing to a school for a learner that has dropped out a long time ago? What we envisage from this system is that we'll be able to track a learner from grade 0 to the end. And our future plans is to have it in higher education, in non-formal education, in TVET centers, because that will inform the workforce or the labor market to say that these are the number of learners that are coming out from the basic education. They are coming into your labor space or your skills center. Be aligned with what is needed in the economy for the country. So we're looking forward to expanding not only for the basic education, but also for higher education and TVET and non-formal. We have already started working with non-formal education to say that we can capture a learner that has dropped out, yet you can accept a learner who comes to a non-formal institution and they sit for an examination that is for a formal system. So when they're reintegrated back into the formal education system, okay. And then another thing that we're looking forward to with this, one thing that has happened recently that has shown that these systems are working. We were presenting our recent findings for 2024. We found out the teacher-pupil ratio is way too low in the country, which is a good thing for other people. But then for the resources and the people, the schools calling for more teachers, it called for the ministry to then do a right-sizing exercise to check in the schools that do we really have enough teachers, or we have over teachers, more teachers in certain schools that need to be reallocated to other schools that are in need of teachers. Yeah, at this point, it's still progress, but it's good progress. We are working with Ministry of Health again on schools health program and also on sexual and reproductive health programs to say that our learners are getting services from your health facilities. What else can we do in the education space to ensure that learners are healthy and also are getting the quality education that we tend to have as a country? Thank you. I hope I wasn't exceeding my time.
Thank you so much, Nadine. No, thank you so much. And thanks for, giving also some future directions for the development of this complex and detailed information systems, moving from general education also to higher education, TVET, even non-formal education, and so on in the future. And also explaining how there is some connections with other sectors, including the health sector. And also providing some concrete examples of how the use of the data at local level is informing more general policy, such as the pupil-teacher ratio and so on. So based on that, we wanted, the colleagues from the University of Oslo that are supporting this initiative, Eswatini, to give us a broader picture of how it develops in the education sector, maybe to learn also some lessons from the health sector, where it started with, and draw some kind of key takeaways and lessons from how it went in Eswatini, but also in other countries where this is being developed. So over to you, Knut.
Thank you very much, Muriel, and thank you to UNESCO IIEP for this opportunity to discuss very key issues. So from the University of Oslo, we are, of course, a research-oriented institution. So we base our work on what we call action research. So we really participate in the implementation of software that is being developed by us and a network of developers around the world. and try to extract lessons that are that can be applied across countries and across very different settings. So I'll try to go into some of the learnings that we've seen from working in more than 10 countries now, and Eswatini is certainly one of the key ones. So if I can move to next slide, yes. So the approach that we are applying, that we have been applying for 2 decades in the health sector and now for about 5-6 years in the education sector, is what we call the digital platform ecosystem approach. So what does that mean? It means that we really try to look at the information architecture as a whole, support ministries and governments in thinking about their national infrastructure, information infrastructure, and try to position the software that's being developed as very generic and flexible, so that it can support a whole range of scenarios and implementation modes, I would say. Starting very typically from, as Anne mentioned, from the annual school census. That is still the bread and butter, if you will, that contains the core information about just all the schools and what they offer, and some key information about their infrastructure, and including both classrooms and toilet stalls, etc., etc. That still remains the bread and butter, and we think that even that sort of very in a sense boring information, because it's been there for decades, is still underutilized. There's still so much more that can be done with that, especially if you make it more flexibly available to various stakeholders, and especially the local levels of what UNESCO calls the middle tier of managers at province, district, and school level. So in this slide, I'm trying to highlight that both the software is supposed to be very flexible and has APIs, etc., so that you can have many contributors in each country if there is technical expertise within the ministry or with some local companies. That is excellent. Then you can create apps on top of the platform, just like with Android or iPhone, etc., in the smartphone. But equally important is the community around the system, the community of stakeholders that are using the data and that have some capacity to actually leverage the data for decision making. And so that's why an equally important component of the software is actually the capacity building around it, for people to contribute, as I said, technical modules to the systems, but also in terms of how can we empower people at the local level, at the school level, at the district level, and also in the broader community to actually use the data. So let me move to what we have extracted in a report for the Global Education Monitoring report last year, which is this scaling dimensions. We think scaling is super important, both to have an impact and also for sustainability. But we think there is many dimensions to it. We know that it is important to focus on key data that people will actually use, and instead of trying to encompass everything from the beginning, and rather have something that is of good quality, people actually have a demand for, and you can show that it's actually working. Then you can build it out, exactly as Nelly was talking about, that we could also add new elements once the basic core infrastructure is in place. And then this concept of decentralization is really key. We think it is really, really important to push the system down to the district level and also to the school level, and even to individual teachers, but there is a huge cost to that. Whenever you move one level down in the information in the education system, there's a lot more people to train, a lot more computers or other tablets, etc., to buy and maintain, and connectivity. So it's not. It is a trade-off, and you really have to consider where do you get most benefit from the resources you have. We also think this concept of integration is really, really important. There will never be one system in a country. You need to pull information together from various sources, ideally into what we call a national data repository, so that you can actually analyze different types of data from a single user interface. Making that data available beyond just the particular person at the national level who is responsible for collecting it, but actually making it useful at the local levels and for various stakeholders is really key to ensure that there will be continued use of the data, there will be demand for the data, there will be support for paying the cost of maintaining these systems, because unfortunately we do see systems that really die after some initial 2 or 3 year funding is drying up. So of course we all want real-time data, but we also have to consider the burden on the people who actually collect the data, and whether collecting data every day is actually necessary, or some data can be done by a census or some kind of survey. But other data can easily be collected regularly and is being done so on paper. So that there is a lot of scope there also for increasing what is traditionally been done in the EMIS world. And then finally, of course, this concept of moving down now, which we really need to do to the individual level, both for teachers and students, that is being done in so many countries. But again, we have to consider, well, are we creating a master list of all the teachers and students, which is updated once a year? Or are we talking about sort of daily attendance data? And does that need to be digitized? We can do it, but we have to always consider the benefits and the costs. So just to show some examples, we really think that it's important for the data to be used at the district level. And this first picture of the lady there is an example of how data is being used at the local level. We think that we can rapidly increase the frequency of collection of some data once the basic infrastructure is in place. And we also see that there's very, very interesting synergies between sectors. And I think Nelly mentioned health. And we've seen this for example, in Uganda, where they, during COVID, they were already rolling out the DHIS2 system at the district level. But then there was a very strong need for the COVID surveillance as schools were reopening after 2 years of closure. So this was really, then having the infrastructure in place made it quite easy in a way to add this element of weekly reporting of COVID cases, etc. Using SMS, using some simple technology in this case. Similarly, when Ebola broke out, that system was in place and they could actually leverage that. Then you have other important things like school feeding, etc. So we think, especially at the local level, at the school level, and also at the district level, we think these synergies are underexploited. There's a lot that can be done with relatively low cost once you build the capacity and you empower the people at the local level to actually use and manage data. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Knut, and it makes a very nice transition to the presentation of Alana that is going to provide a very concrete examples on how data are being used at local level in the context of Honduras, and also illustrating also how they can be very useful synergies between sectors. As you mentioned, can be the case with the health sector, and there has been a big push after, indeed, for instance, the COVID or the Ebola crisis, but it can also be the case with other sets of database from other sectors, as we will hear in the context of Honduras. So over to you, Alana.
Bien, muy buenos días a todos y todas.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. From the Ministry of Education in Honduras, I thank UNESCO to give me the opportunity to let me share the progress that we have made with data systems. The Secretary of Education, or the Ministry of Education, has different educational centers, and I want to talk to you about the early warning and response system, which is a strategy of full inclusion to guarantee the right to education to vulnerable populations. And it is important to say that we, as a country, are a place in which there are large flux of migration that have increased significantly in an important manner. We can go to the next slide, please.
Bien. Comentarles entonces que la Secretaría de Educación cuenta con el sistema.
I want to let you know that the Ministry of Education has the SACE, which is the Educational Centers Administration System that manages educational centers at a national level. Therefore, we have all data with 4 important points. We manage coverage in educational centers. They have a SASE code that we provide, and they can check tuition, performance, assistance, and everything in schools. So what can we see, or what can we analyze from all of this SACE system? We have noticed that our strategy of full inclusion to guarantee the access to education, we have seen that we have managed to track and follow up school desertion, and we have been able to do it thanks to early warnings, thanks to different educational trajectories of our students. We have managed to have early responses from our educational centers within the country between February and April, with the constant follow-up from the administration system through SACE. Our strategy includes the analysis, or the technological analysis, that follows tuition, or enrollment rather. And this guarantees that we can follow up the number of enrollments of our students and also take early decisions. All of this guarantees access to our learners until they can have managed to fully enroll. So just to let you know that we have a flexible type of enrollment, because there are certain areas in our country that are more agriculturally based, mostly harvesting coffee. For this reason, many parents choose to delay when they will enroll their children. So what have we done? We have allowed for a flexible type of enrollment so that these children are not affected. We have seen other strategies that ensure that children manage to have the skills necessary. So now we want to show you how this tracking or follow-up system works. We follow up between May and October, and we obtain data from all our learners or our students, and this includes an automatized data of school desertion, school abandonment, and also we have information from our headmasters, our teachers, so that they can have all the necessary tools of educational actions depending on the number of school dropouts that we have noticed. So what have we noticed? We have noticed that between children and youth in our country that are at risk of leaving out or have a leave-out risk, we have noticed that we have managed to have an information management tool throughout the whole country. And at the start of my speech, I said that any person that is legally enrolled has a SASE code that allows us to identify how they have come from enrollment to dropping out or leaving school, and all the mechanisms that we can deploy. Then our early response system follows for a flexible and inclusive type of access. So we manage data as such, and we also have alert systems that allow us to make decisions and carry out improvement plans through our educational actions. All of this has a follow-up at an educational level, and I will share those later on. It is important to say that all educational responses that we have in place are completely flexible and inclusive. So we have an institutional response of our educational plans and also network educational plans, and this includes a toolkit that includes different strategies for an institutional response, also an early response system that is a part of SASE, and also a specific module of early response. So, what has this strategy allowed us to have? Our intentions are good, and we try to identify the reasons why a child leaves, and for this reason we have created very concrete tools, including a teacher kit so that they can identify school dropouts, and we have also developed documents and materials that include institutional answers, and we also have manuals that are specific for teachers so that they can identify the risk of the students leaving, and that would allow them to also enter the information into the platform. Therefore, we can see how vulnerable the students are to learn, and we have also plan things at a national and international level, and we also have certain methodological orientations to manage risks. All of this has allowed us to create an institutional type of planning based on the creation of specific projects to have an educational response for children and adolescents that are in a vulnerable state. All of this can be seen in our educational centers. Whenever we carry out an action, we can identify which are the most serious cases of the possibility of students dropping out. I mentioned that we have projects within the educational centers, but we also have specific projects that are focused on migration within the educational network. The strategy of educational networks is one of our strategies that, as the Ministry of Education, has been good for us. Why? Because we have created an educational center that we call Centros de Red, so educational headquarters that allow us to see the distance that we have with other educational networks. For example, 4 kilometers, and then we can identify this sort of basic educational center, and we can identify their educational practices, which ones are more stable in time, and how often children go to school. So what have we found through our strategy? There is an administrative response. And how do we notice this? Through data that allows us to see in a flexible manner when students enter or leave the network. We have noticed at the national level that there is human mobility. We have seen that there are some people that are forced and some children that obviously migrate within the country. So we have a tool that is called the SASE, and it allows us to also have a response to manage emotions, a socio-emotional response. And we also use a fourth element that is having a permanent type of response. With this permanent response, we take into account that we need to strengthen the child's skills so that they do not have a stigma saying, oh, this person left and now they came back. We try to support them and try to help them catch up educationally. This means then that we have a joint type of response that is institutionally coordinated. That means that we have educational incentives that allows us to be more holistic. It allows us to also train teachers that are going to now work with the children. As a country, we are known for being a country that has a large migration flux, which means that we also have host cities and we deploy certain educational roadmaps there in order to help the children that live there. Now, when we have this SASE system or alert management reporting and information analysis, allows us to have different types of data and numbers. So here on the screen, we can see enrollment by following different indexes. I previously mentioned that we had a very easy to identify indexes. So children that are in mobility status. I would like to say precisely that when it comes to the children that go back to the country and with pre-basic education, we have noticed with our different data, we have been able to obtain data in terms of gender of the year. So children in a pre-basic level of education. In 2022, we have over 1,643 children that were reintegrated in the educational system. From those, a large number were present between 2022 and 2023, a total of 2,640 children. So we can affirm that when it comes to children in basic education, the number is even more important because there is a larger number of children migrating when they enter basic education. So more children were reintegrated in 2022-2023, over 16,193 children. They were enrolled, they were reintegrated into the system, and they have their SASE code, and they can now keep on going throughout their educational path. So for basic education, we have over 7,174 children we took care of. And then when it comes to secondary education, the number is smaller. So what does this mean? That the number of enrolled students in mobility status increased in over 28,761 youths. What does this mean? That as a country, we need to document, we need to have data of reinsertion and the number of students that leave. So we are now, once the students are reintegrated, we need to assess their skills. We need to see what their mathematical level is, for example, to see how they can progress later on. So, according to the data we have in 2022-2023, when we assess their skills, we see that there was over 23,000 children that were attended. We're talking about basic and secondary education. Therefore, we could also look at a... You have 1 minute, Elena. So the third element I want to talk of is the total number of mobile students that withdrew due to dropping out or leaving school is of over 3,923. And as a country, we want to have an early response system. So it is necessary to have enough data for decision making. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alana. That was a very interesting experience that I'm sure will be of interest to many of our participants. So we have been hearing about how a wealth of data, including data related to health, migrations, and so on, are being used in the context of Honduras. But now I must say we are going to go a step further by raising the questions on how this type of information is being used also to raise accountability within the education systems. And for this, so I'm calling on Stanley and his experience both in the US and in Australia to share his perspective on how this wealth of data information systems is being used to promote accountability within education systems. So over to you, Stanley. You're muted, Stanley. You need to mute yourself. You need to unmute.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and to my former colleagues in Australia, where it's already tomorrow, good day. I start with this example because I just want to make the point that it's a very large, diverse world we live in. And accountability systems in school or pretty much anywhere, but I'm going to be focusing on school systems, need to reflect the history, the culture, and the need and the context of the particular environment. And it changes even within the country, from the federal level down to the state or even the city, locality, or individual schools. There are large differences that need to be reflected. So I'm going to start with what is the current state of school accountability systems? I'm then going to talk about what could be. What are the best practices from my experiences in Australia, in the US, and looking around the world? And then I'm going to end with a small, but I think powerful example of how data can be used in a very simple but direct way to demonstrate effectiveness of instruction and student learning. Okay. Should be advancing my slides. Go ahead. There we go. So I want to start. What's the continuum of systems? What's out there now? And it really ranges a great deal. Some systems have no accountability systems at all. And they need to think about that. Why? What is the state of theirs? Maybe they don't have the data. Maybe they don't have an understanding or a consensus on what the system should be. And it's very important to think about all those things and build your system. The first stage is often just publishing indicators. Muriel talked about the Australia My School website. I encourage you to go there. You'll see a profile of each of 10,000 Australian schools that have a variety of indicators. The best way to describe my school, there's an English expression, sunshine is the best disinfectant. Just putting it out there allows people to see, to discuss, and debate. You don't necessarily need anything more than just put it out there and watch what happens with that. And that's primarily the Australia system. There are differences across the states, but the My School website provides a snapshot, which we believe is a fair snapshot of all the schools across a variety of indicators. USA has gone much beyond that with not just publishing, but providing performance labels and requiring improvement plans based on how schools are performing primarily on state assessments. They've even gone so far as to add significant consequences, including closing schools, firing principals, and the state taking the school over. I'm not recommending that. I'm just saying there's the full continuum from none all the way to full state control. I also want to mention that there are differences, and again, these are societal differences that explain these things. Not surprisingly, Singapore has a very centralized system, federal system driving the system. US and Australia have mixed models. Federal and state have different roles. But again, because of the culture, in Australia, the footprint is primarily federal, state-driven with the federal website. In the USA, it is primarily the federal government through various acts of Congress, whether it's the No Child Left Behind Act, the Every Student Succeed Act, different strong federal requirements around accountability. And then a place like Canada, again, based on culture and history, primarily state and province driven. So there are very large differences between the continuum and the locus of control. Now, what about the indicators? Again, many systems are just assessment driven. In the US, there are other indicators, but it's primarily an assessment driven system where annual tests are given and accountability is based on the performance of students on these assessments. These are clearly high stakes, large scale assessments. There's systems, and here's where my school not only has assessment data, but includes attendance, finance, student participation in various programs as part of accountability. So do students participate in work readiness programs? How do they do that? What's the percentage? How do they deal with their, what we call special populations, their students with disability or other subgroups? We've got in England where assessment, behavior, attitudes, personal development, and leadership and management are part of the accountability system. Not surprising, given culture, Finland has an alternate model, not focusing on specific indicators of literacy and numeracy, but looking at broader social values, growth of the individual personality, moral character. Now, you need to have a very sophisticated system of monitoring to do that. The easiest system is just give an assessment and see what happens. Easy does not mean best. So we need to focus on the interaction between what data are available, as Knut talked about, what's the cost of collecting that data, and how are you going to use the data? What we are seeing is an increased use of not just how well you're performing as a school, but how much you've grown as a school. So the emphasis on status and growth. I have the belief that because of consequences and different instances, not every school can necessarily be a high status, a high achieving school, but every school can be a high growth school. And I'll show examples at the end. And then we're trying to link schools fairly by their finance, by their populations. In US, socioeconomic status. In Australia, ICSEA. In England, degree of disadvantage. Trying to create fair comparisons when we look at schools. Okay. So now I want to get to what I consider best practice in school accountability models. These are my lessons learned. I say that this is what could be. I really believe this is what should be, but that would be arrogant of me, so I'm not going to say that. But I truly believe this is best practice in school accountability models. Probably the most important is they need to be fair. Current systems inordinately published under-resourced schools. If you don't have the fair comparisons, if you only look at achievement rather than growth, then some schools just give up. They can't win the system. The system is gamed against them. So best practice systems are designed so that all schools can succeed regardless of their circumstances. Community-centered current systems, particularly in the US, are top-down, requiring standardization regardless of the demographics, history, and culture of the school and its communities. Best practice systems are built to reflect the values of the school and its surrounding communities. We're emphasizing both academic and social indicators. Common set of indicators with local enhancements. I believe mastery is important on academic achievement, and growth is not enough. I'm going to use a parochial example. People always say, well, we should only look at growth. But I know Disney World is all over, Disneyland is all over the world. And in what I call the Disney World test, it doesn't matter how tall, how much you've grown the last year. If your little head doesn't hit that line, you're not getting on the ride. And that's the example of there is a minimal academic achievement all students, all schools must have. But we must allow growth. We must allow local enhancements in order to meet that standard. Okay. So emphasizing growth along with status. All schools may not be high achieving schools yet, but all schools can be high growth, and high growth over time results in high status. My metaphor about disinfectant and sunshine, focus on public disclosure, but that's not enough. And then community discussion. A lot of times we publish and then that's enough. We do not require the deep work that comes after that, where I like to say, are differences expected and are they acceptable? And what are you going to do about the differences, the achievement gaps within and across communities? And finally, we need to link our authentic accountability systems to authentic cultural assessments that are fair, unbiased, and linked to the interests and needs of individual students. And technology, whether it's computer adaptive assessment, dictionaries, glossaries, or just tailored assessments, not move away from standardized one-size-fits-all and move towards perhaps moving away towards more portfolios or performance tasks. So now I want to move to my example. At ACARA in Australia, we released information on schools that demonstrated substantial above average gain in their NAPLAN is the national assessment as students progress from year 3 to year 5 and from 7 to 9. Gains of this magnitude are significant and worthy of highlighting and acknowledgement. And the best part is we were able to highlight high growth schools regardless of their socioeconomic, their ICSIA level. So isn't this beautiful? I think this is beautiful. I wouldn't describe what it is. We have 4 quadrants. The 2 axes are mastery or achievement and growth. Quadrant 1 is schools. Each of these dots is a school in the country. 10,000 schools. So you got a lot of dots. You can make this bigger or smaller. The schools in quadrant 1 are low achievement and low growth schools. No one wants to be in this quadrant. Quadrant 4 are high achievement, high growth schools. This is a very nice quadrant to be. Now, the ones you consider, what do you call quadrant 2 and quadrant 3? Because you have to think orderly. Well, I've decided that growth should be more important than achievement, particularly to motivate schools. So I call quadrant 2 high achievement, low growth schools. And the question for schools in quadrant 2 is, why aren't you growing? Okay, you're high achieving, but that doesn't mean you're done. There's still work to be done. So what are you going to do to make even higher achievement?
So maybe we are going to conclude, Stanley?
In 30 seconds, yes. Quadrant 3 is a real motivating for under-resourced schools because they may be low achieving, but they're high growth schools. And the beauty of this is I don't need labels. I just put this out and I let the community debate. Why are you in this sector? Are you satisfied being in this sector? And the goal schools are schools that have the highly significant achievement. So you don't need a sophisticated system with lots of labels. This is every school, very simple model, and it provides the impetus for local discussion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Stanley. Thanks a lot. What I suggest is that, well, we have quite a number of questions already in the chat, and I think quite a number of people are interested by knowing about the human factors that are behind those systems that were shared with us. So maybe very quickly, in just 2 or 3 minutes, just focusing on the country experiences that were shared with us. So maybe Nelly, Alana, and Stanley, in reference to the different country initiatives that you have shared, if you can just give us a very quick idea about what are the human resources that are behind those experiences. Nelly?
Okay. We realized when we're into the shift that the capacity for the staff that we had, because initially it was just capturing information from the schools, and then now we have to ensure that the quality that is being captured at school level is okay, and then we have to check against the trends, ensuring that data quality is on the top tier. It's one of the capacity training that it's still ongoing that we need to have. And then looking at, it's a web-based system, obviously resources that needs to be there are the tablets and your internet connectivity. And that it just takes a huge pile of resources towards that, and then capacity for the teachers who are capturing the information. So those are the things we didn't think about, and we are finding ourselves in, and we're trying to maneuver through. But yeah, work in progress. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Nelly. Alana, can you give us an idea about, well, human resources behind the early warning systems that you presented?
Definitivamente a través de la Mesa Ministerial de Transformación Digital.
Yes, indeed. With the ministerial table, we have made a lot of progress in capacity building for teachers. There are 5 components to this, and it's on-site training, providing technology, and then interinstitutional connections. With making available technology, capacity building for teachers, all of this is indispensable. You also need an ethics engagement, the virtuous use of data so that communities will trust us. We believe that accessibility to all this new technology is a way of doing this. But each teacher has their own SACE code, which allows them to see everything that has been done with the children ever since they were first enrolled in school up until their school performance.
Just to give us an idea about human factors behind, and also still some challenges related to capacity development related to this experience.
No school ever improved just by giving them a label. So I'm going to talk on the front end and the back end. On the front ends, really have to do the hard work of getting the community involved in what are our values? What do we want our children to achieve? How do we want that reflected? And that's the front end. On the back end, once you're given the label, then what do you do about it? There needs to be models, best practices. What we did in Australia, those gold schools, we put them up as resources. We asked them, so that a principal could call a principal of one of those gold schools. What did you do? How did you improve? So you have to have the upfront work, and then on the back end, you need to have resources and actual successful models for people to follow based on their own particular circumstances.
Thanks a lot, Stanley. So we have quite a number of questions in the chat, so I'm going to address those questions to several of you. So the first set of questions, I think, is for you, Nelly. If you can hear me, Nelly. So first, there is a question on what kind of challenges you have faced during the shift from paper to electronic data collection. And you showed us a beautiful picture showing the difference between the two. And so if you can let us know the specific challenges related to this shift in the context of Eswatini. Second question is also to you, Nelly, about the basic benefits to use and choose DHIS2, for instance, rather than StatEduc. So to help us explain the value added of these models compared to others. And then the last one also to you, Nelly, well, how the training of school actors in particular has been made in the context of Eswatini through missions, through, well, in what format, and how it had helped improve the quality of data. So that's a first set of questions to you, especially Nelly, and maybe Knut may want to complement. Now to Alana, on the level of community engagement. So you mentioned that, well, the idea is also to mobilize communities around these early warning systems. How did this work? And how communities were empowered as part of this initiative? And there is also some questions about students living in rural environments, specific strategies that you have used to prevent children from missing classes in this context, including during harvest time, and what type of strategies you developed based on that. And also, another questions to you, Elena, on how the alerts are being created. So what does it mean, really, alerts, based on the database that you have shared with us, and how especially school actors and teachers are being alerted through the systems and based on the information provided by the ministry. So how the alert itself is working. And maybe, Stanley, for you, questions related to school growth, and how do you exactly mean by school growth, and why focusing on school growth rather than maybe just comparing each schools to a national average or a local average. So maybe we can start with you, Nelly.
Thank you. Knut, you'll help me in other things that I've missed. Thank you. So for Eswatini, the training of focal teachers, can I just first mention that the initial supporter for the shift, it was UNICEF. Then for the past 2 financial years, it has been government. The rollout has been government, and the budget allocated to the EMIS has increased, and this it's because they want the accountability to free primary education program to be as as true as it possibly can, and also for the overseas, again, that program. So tracking that and seeing what is happening to the learners in schools, that's one of the reasons there was the push from the government side to say we're fully funding this move. Why DHIS2? So initially when we began, we did we scouted around the region for what other countries were doing. And then eventually it was an open tender sourcing for those who are going to assist us with specific terms of reference to say that we want anyone who's going to come up in the country to assist us in this development of the system to be somebody who understands that we want it to be a long-term thing, tracking a learner, and eventually interlinking with other ministries and of course the HIS2 happened to us, which is a great thing. I don't know if I've missed another question.
Well, they
Thank you.
mentioned also about the challenges moving from paper to electronic data collections, and also benefits of this type of approach compared to other approaches such as StatEduc, and especially how you've been for the capacity building of school actors, especially.
Okay. The capacity building, we had to engage all the end users of the data collection tool. We had to involve them, to train them on why the questions are needed and what they are being used for. And then we had to we have had the support of HISP Uganda and with Mozambique, who were the developers of the system initially, to also capacitate not only the EMIS department, also the regional and also the teachers on how best you can use the system to your advantage, how best you can use the analytics that are provided by the system to your advantage in your planning and programming. As I've mentioned, the StatEdu, I think they didn't apply because it was we sourced it through the market. It wasn't like something that we were looking at other open sources. They applied and then they apparently got the job. Yeah, the resources that are needed, they are huge. But what my former boss always said when he was presenting to ministers at cabinet meetings, when they were asking for government to support the whole initiative, that was that initially the cost will be huge, but eventually the benefit would be far better than the resources that were there at the beginning. I think getting the point of having accountability from all sectors, from schools and parents and communities, getting the best out of what they've put in is what is driving the initiative forward. That is what is driving government to support us this much. Yes, capacity building is one of the things that I think are critical, because if you're saying you're moving from paper-based to web-based, that means you have to know the back, the front, and other things that could happen in between the digital space. So yeah, and the resources, the infrastructure needs to be in place, and the human capacity needs to be in place.
Good. Thank you, Nelly. I don't know, Knut, if you want to say a word to complement very quickly.
Yeah, thank you. And we know there are very good systems out there, and when they are functioning, I think what we always aim to do with this architectural perspective is to complement whatever is functioning well, and of course replace whatever is not functioning. But mainly try to build on the systems that are in place, because there will, as I said, be always more than one system in a country. But they need to interoperate on key issues, and we need to have the same strong quality list of schools, list of teachers, lists of register of students. And we have worked, for example, in Togo to import data from StatEduc to DHIS2 to provide a more flexible platform, for example, so that they can also connect the platform to WhatsApp to disseminate exam results to students, etc., and parents. So the flexibility and the community around it, I think, would be the most distinguishing features. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Knut. Over to you, Elena, about community mobilizations and strategies in rural context.
Sí, me gustaría comentarle, ¿verdad?
Yes.
Ya todo el manejo estadístico nos establece
I
que la
would like to say that
deserción
all
escolar es
the
más alta en las zonas
statistical
rurales.
management
Y
shows that
algunos
there
factores
is
que
a
la
higher
determinan
rate of
incluyen
attendance at a
precisamente
rural level,
temas de
but
género, es
obviously
decir,
there are
90% de las
gender
deserciones
differences. 70% of dropouts are based in rural zones, and most take place in lower income households, especially percentiles 1 and 2. And most dropouts are on sixth grade. So what we have done with the early response system, what we did with this was that we tried to focus on identifying who these young people were, which is why we automatized the data collection. So our community has to really participate because this is how we focus our educational networks. We have thousands of educational networks at a national level. So what do I mean? The educational roadmap of students sets out this connection between the educational center. They create this syllabus or educational plan for our students. For example, we need to address why the student is not showing up to school, and then we follow up from there. So we try to make families participate as well so that we can work one-on-one with the student. We have an integral approach, a holistic approach. So we believe that these early responses help that in the educational centers we can carry out in specific actions so that we can really help the students. I also mentioned we have a toolkit that uses social-emotional responses, the accompanying mothers, fathers, and also we want to train teachers to know how to follow up children that leave or come back so that they can also stay there in the long term.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Elena. Over to you, Stanley, about this idea of school growth.
Yeah, very quick. So the problem with using averages as the basis is averages hide a lot of information and it ignores the fact that schools are very different and you'd be combining a lot of unlike things in the average. So there are many growth models that have been developed. I want to focus on two of them. One is tracking an individual student as he or she progresses through various grade levels and how are they getting to mastery or are they getting closer to mastery? So that's one model where we're looking at how students are progressing and are they on a trajectory to be proficient in whatever the standards are as they exit the systems. The second one is more cohort by cohort, looking at, say, year three across years and see whether or not we're improving the experience of our year three students or year seven, whatever grade we're talking about, so that we're taking advantage of the information from the accountability system to make improvements so that the next cohort of students are able to achieve higher.
Thanks a lot, Stanley. So we're getting to the concluding remarks from all of you, starting with Am. Well, clearly one of the main challenge has to do still with the uptake of data, including at the most decentralized level, getting to the schools, school stakeholders, but also including what is community, more broadly speaking, and including citizens, maybe as part of this process. So if you were to recommend one thing in terms of promoting uptake of data by the school community, especially, and maybe by citizens, what would you recommend? Starting with you,
Yeah, perhaps very quickly, just to say that there's a lot of pressure on every actor of the education sector to, use evidence and use data and, be focused on, these aspects of decision making, to inform decisions. And I would just say that local actors, school leaders, teachers, of course, but also communities have the right intuitions about the information that is needed to make decisions. Of course, different experiences of different, administrators in the system can be relevant. But I think that the more we can connect to the very local realities, the environment, the climate, the socio-economic context, the culture, the languages spoken at home, I think these are the information that will help us make good decisions in combination, of course, with all our infrastructure. I will leave the discussion on being humble in the size of the data that we need to collect, to not overburden, and also spend a lot of resources in just hosting data, and this sustainability aspect also. So I will leave that to another forum. But I will close on this, thanking all colleagues for the good discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. Nelly, one recommendations in terms of uptake of data at the most granular level?
Is that you just have in your back of your mind, what is the whole purpose of collecting at that individual level? I think we have shifted from looking at schools as just centers to send our children to, but we have to go back and look at that this is an individual that has to transform through the services that we're bringing to the table as a country. If you're looking at health, education, and what the economy will require from them, look into that, the whole perspective of an individual, and then contribute to that. And when you're contributing to that, you'll be cutting costs at the end of the day, where there will be a need for other data systems, yet you just incorporated one data system and interlinked them with everyone else. And thank you for the wonderful discussions. I've learned a lot from everybody else. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nelly. Knut, one recommendations to conclude?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my recommendation is really to take the systems perspective, but actually focus on something simple first and make sure that works really well, provides data that is actually useful for the local actors, the people who collect the data, so that you get good quality, they are motivated to collect it, they use it themselves. And then when trust is built around the data and the system, then you can build it out and add additional data. But focus on simple things first. It's my main recommendation. Simple and useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Knut. Elena?
Sí, agradecer, ¿verdad? Esta oportunidad, definitivamente.
Well, first, I would like to thank you all for giving me this opportunity. Putting a human face on all of those data is very important. In Honduras, it's particularly crucial. We have this early warning system in Honduras, and that's a given, but we would like to be able to share this system. We know for a fact that if people drop out of school, it's because they don't have money, it's because they have family problems, it's because they don't have access to education. And this is where we need to act. We need to come up with targeted actions to make education attractive and to make the right decisions. This is the system that we created is meant to collect data to make the right decisions. Thank you very much. Il n'est pas facile de créer des systèmes de collecte d'informations fiables. Mais je crois que nous devons passer à un niveau supérieur. Nous ne pouvons pas nous contenter des données que nous avons à l'heure actuelle parce que nous devons trouver le moyen de recueillir les données dont nous avons besoin. C'est comme ça que les choses avanceront. Merci beaucoup, Stanley. Merci à tous nos collègues et tous nos collègues. Alors, pour résumer, vous nous avez dit qu'il est important de créer des systèmes qui ne soient pas trop complexes, mais qui puissent être élargis. Il faut veiller à ce qu'ils restent pertinents pour les populations locales. Dans nos présentations, nous avons également vu clairement les différentes opportunités qu'offrent ces écosystèmes pour un dialogue intersectoriel. Et je crois que ça a été très intéressant de montrer comment est-ce que les discussions et le dialogue au sein du secteur éducatif peuvent être rapprochés d'autres secteurs tels que le secteur de santé, par exemple, ou d'autres. autres, de façon à mieux éclairer les décisions à prendre en matière éducative. Vous avez également parlé des obstacles en matière de financement, de alignement avec les différents systèmes d'information, et vous avez également donné des exemples très clairs de la manière dont tous ces systèmes de collecte d'informations peuvent être utilisés, notamment en matière d'équité pour le financement à l'Eswatini, mais également sur des groupes ciblés bien particuliers, comme vous nous l'avez dit, pour le Honduras et plus généralement en matière de responsabilisation, notamment la responsabilisation des établissements. C'est ce que nous a dit Stanley. Peut-être pourrons-nous finir avec un certain nombre de principes de base qui nous ont été établis par Stanley. Justice, système axé sur les communautés, peut-être des indicateurs qui sont mis en place en tenant compte des besoins des communautés, la croissance des établissements, les discussions avec les établissements et également des mesures, des données qui prennent compte des spécificités culturelles. Merci beaucoup, merci à tous les orateurs et à notre oratrice pour nos deux oratrices pour cette intervention. Alors voilà qui clôt notre série pour l'année 2024, mais 2025 nous attend avec une nouvelle série et l'année prochaine nous allons nous intéresser à d'autres questions très importantes, à savoir l'équité. Alors j'espère que vous serez de nouveau avec nous l'année prochaine. J'espère que vous continuerez à suivre ces débats stratégiques. L'enregistrement de cette session ainsi que les présentations PowerPoint seront mises à votre disposition sur le site Internet et vous aurez également un site Internet qui vous parviendra prochainement dans lequel vous aurez un certain nombre de liens afin de prolonger les discussions du jour. Merci encore une fois à l'ensemble des participantes et des participants qui ont été très nombreux aujourd'hui. Je vous souhaite d'excellentes vacances de fin d'année et j'attends avec impatience de vous retrouver en 2025. Merci, merci beaucoup à toutes et à tous et au revoir.